My name is Meegan Zickus. I am an attorney and bioethicist in the biology department here at Grand Valley. And I have the distinct privilege, as they stated, of serving on the State of Michigan Department of Health Ethics Committee. But who we are is way more than our resumes. And the core of who we are cannot be reduced to a CV. Who we are and that innate desire to belong and the freedom to connect with others was a primal hurt during the COVID pandemic. We missed simple things, which we learned weren't so simple after all. We missed the things that make life actual living, and we missed, through absence, how much we needed each other. Think back. Take 1 minute and think back to where you were when the world halted. Remember the worry and the concern and the loss of freedom. For most, the science of vaccines and better antiviral treatments has meant a return to normalcy, a return to that freedom, but not for all. Not for the 1,400,000 Americans who succumb to a virulent pathogen, not for their grief-stricken families, and certainly not for the 9 million immunosuppressed Americans. You see, the great irony of being a bioethicist is that is the CV part of me. But who I am, and my truth, is that I am one of those 9 million immunosuppressed Americans. I have a rare, invisible illness that is treated with high-dose immunosuppressants during the COVID pandemic. My family and I have isolated for 2.5 years. We limit everything, and we N95 everywhere. The real loss is that of connection and that interaction with others. We have lost friends and family and almost every bit of normalcy. We have, as I like to refer to it, become virtually invisible. And most of the world has moved on from COVID, but for the immunosuppressed, the harsh reality of this deadly virus is far from over. And so tonight, I ask you to acknowledge the immunosuppressed as disabled people with invisible illnesses worthy of protections, compassions, and dignity. Chronic conditions or disabilities that significantly impair normal activities of daily living affect 1 out of 10 people. In fact, 96% of people living with chronic conditions live with a condition that cannot be seen with the naked eye. The 9 million immunosuppressed Americans live this way every day. The naked eye cannot see the body's inability to protect itself. Their voices are unheard because all of their energy and every hour of their day goes into surviving and functioning. There is nothing left to educate others or to share, and there aren't even very many opportunities for it, which just furthers the invisibility. In fact, the immunosuppressed have become invisible in a new way during the COVID pandemic because the world has found it easier to move on than to see the truth of their lives. When we look at history and how various people have been discriminated against, it can be disturbing to see how those seeds are so easily planted. While in no way as horrendous as genocide or racism or suffrage, the tenets of such disregard begin to take hold. The very safety of their own existence, their lives, is conveniently overlooked. The social prejudice of ableism, both intentionally and unintentionally, appears personally and institutionally, declaring healthy people superior, worthy of living full, free lives, and the freedom of the healthy to return to a normal life while still in the midst of a pandemic outweighs the basic safety of others. The mistreatment of a class of persons because of their illness is largely connected to eugenics. The idea that only certain people were deserving of coming forth in their humanity, of having basic rights and living freely, was a principle of the United States' own miscegenation and segregation laws, which Hitler took inspiration from. It is a classist concept, encouraging control through mechanisms that allow a selected population to advance while inhibiting others even to their demise. The belief that one is inherently better than another, regardless of the way our bodies and minds work and the states they exist in, can be quite convenient. United States laws protect people from communicable diseases, tracking those who may have come in contact with an infection. The law is well established in such cases as Jacobson versus Massachusetts, and that held that government can intervene in public health for the spread of disease, even mandating vaccines and quarantines. Does anybody remember stories of Typhoid Mary? Mary was an asymptomatic carrier of typhus in New York in the early 1900s. She was responsible for deaths and infections because she could not believe that somebody who wasn't sick could actually spread disease. We know people can be asymptomatic carriers of transmissible diseases, and yet most people have given up on COVID testing and socially distancing. It gives new meaning to the old adage that the right to swing your fist or spread your germs ends where my nose begins. The concept of freedom and how it affects others is a big part of the pandemic. The power, the right to act, think as one wants without hindrance. This person's autonomy and their freedom is a central principle in the study of bioethics. A person's autonomy, however, their freedom, is much different than a health hierarchy. The study of bioethics evaluates situations such as actively promoting the welfare of another and not inflicting harm. One ethical test is called Lowe's three-step model, and it asks 3 questions. Is it legal? Is it balanced? And how does it make me feel? Take, for example, a man in a wheelchair. Most of us would say that having wheelchair-accessible accommodations is legal, and we would also agree that it's balanced between him and the rest of the world. He has access, you have access, no one is excluded. We feel good that this man can get out in our world, and we acknowledge his disability and see him as worthy of protection, compassion, and dignity. We can extend this ethical evaluation to other situations. We don't feel provoked by braille letters on signs or captions on screens, diabetic options on menus, and maybe only slightly by letting people who need a little extra time to board the airplane ahead of us. I like to think that it is the shock and the horror and the disbelief of a global pandemic that shifted something. But maybe it really was there all along, another invisible aspect. The virulence of COVID has been unprecedented. Deaths, hospitalizations, unknown numbers of those afflicted with long haulers, and we still do not know all of the potential side effects. If the immunosuppressed, however, had not known their risks, those numbers would be much, much higher. But we did know. My rare disease is called necrotizing autoimmune myopathy. It did not have a name when I first got sick. Less than 500 people in the world have this idiopathic form of NAM, and that means that we have no idea what caused mine. My body attacks and kills off my muscle cells, and 4 years ago I was in a wheelchair. There is no cure, and there is only experimental treatment with high-dose immunosuppressants. I'm part of a few research projects at the Mayo Clinic with Dr. Margarita Maloney. Like many people who have been mistreated by others in society, most rare and chronically ill people have been misdiagnosed, ignored, shunned, and had healthcare providers treat them atrociously. Some providers treat you poorly because they are offended by what they don't know or understand. And this is similar to racism, classism, and every other type of discrimination. The mistreatment is cruel, as these trained professionals wear their white coats like superiority, their privilege. When I dared to question my first neurologist, he said that my hesitancy to follow his recommendations was that I just hadn't suffered enough. The next one refused to order additional testing because he plainly said he didn't know what to do. I've had inept nurses try to access my chest port with a needle that they had just used in the previous attempt, and I lost it. On that occasion, my husband coined the term a code M. You are tested, just as many different cultures and people are, to determine your validity. And if a medical test cannot show a definitive known diagnosis, you must be crazy. In fact, after my first literal battery of tests, I asked Dr. Maloney, am I nuts? How can I have all of these symptoms and all of these tests and still no known answers? And her response was classic Maloney. She said, Mrs. Zickus, you could be completely crazy, but not about this. People ask what the hard parts of the journey are, and it isn't the crazy. It is plainly the loneliness of illness. It is having your own body taken away from you, and then having a pandemic take what is left. And in those many hours alone with you and your Benedict Arnold of a body, you wonder where your people are. Why won't they stand by you? They tire of your illness, and they tire of isolating, and you have become too much work for them. You are a constant reminder of mortality. I had dear, longtime people in my life say that I should sacrifice for the good of my family so that my kids could go back to a normal life. I fail to see how the guilt of bringing a virus home that could kill their mother is a good thing. The impact on the families of the immunosuppressed means that they are living the same as their afflicted loved one, isolated and suffering. Even if it is easy to cast the sick and diseased aside, what about the healthy family members who have to live as the immunosuppressed to keep their loved ones safe? The mental suffering of this is an abyss. They cope because they knew and know that they are doing all they can to protect their families from unknown side effects, from more loss. They take solace in their safety, the strength to persevere, and not trade months of sacrifice for a quick run to the grocery store. And the support comes when others respect safety measures with compassion, and when you are treated with dignity and protection as an equal. Wars have been fought to ensure equality, but like many people without protections, they were overridden by the desires of those with perceived superior rights. And now it is health privilege that is doing the overriding. Personal choice should not strip others of their personal choice. Failing to protect others is not a political statement. Diseases are equal opportunity, even when we as people fail to see the equality of other humans. We all have inherent value as human beings, whether you can see the disability or not. With all of the new diseases being discovered, just because you don't know about them does not invalidate their existence or the person suffering from them. Denying a person's disability does not negate it, just like denying science does not negate the pandemic. Those who consciously decide not to see the truth of illness, of disability, and of fact choose to remain in the health hierarchy. We must strive to accept that which we do not like or understand. No one likes that COVID isn't over, and just because we don't have a ticker tape of death scrolling across the bottom of our screen does not mean that people are not dying from this, being hospitalized, or seriously ill. These are unprecedented times that call for and demand our unprecedented thoughts. We must see the truth through each other, and we must acknowledge that each of us lose our humanity, our own rights, and our own freedom when we allow someone else's to be taken. In this harsh and beautiful world, we need to remember our history of the racism and classism and privilege. We need to remember what we missed at the beginning of the pandemic, all of those interactions that make life actually living. We learned through absence how very much we need each other, and I pray that we also don't miss through absence freedom. People are different races, cultures, religions, sexes, and afflictions. We know this. We know so much. We know about viruses, their transmissibility, and ability to continuously mutate. And yet here we stand for another time in history, systemically mistreating those that we may even unconsciously perceive as less. And so tonight, I ask you to acknowledge the immunosuppressed as disabled people with invisible illnesses worthy of protections, compassion, and dignity. 9 million people, more than the population of Israel or Hong Kong. The invisibility of immunosuppression should be seen for their truth. Thank you.